A very warm welcome to this panel discussion, which will explore ethics and social media dilemmas in charity comms, of which I think we will all agree there seem to be a lot at the moment. So if you're responsible for social media at your organization, sympathy and solidarity. So before we get into the meaty questions, I just want to set the scene and give a bit of context to the discussion today. Essentially, why has social media become so problematic? So let's start with the bin fire that is X, formerly Twitter. Since Elon Musk took over Twitter and rebranded it to X, misinformation is rife, even coming from Musk himself, who has huge influence with his 213 million followers. I think we probably all agree that the vibe on X is pretty toxic, and there really is genuine and well-founded concern for charities, especially in certain sectors, because being on that platform doesn't always feel particularly safe. And since Trump was re-elected as president, it feels like that toxic atmosphere has gotten even worse. A good example of this was when Musk did a poll about the US liberating the UK from their tyrannical government, which had over 1 million votes. And if you were in the session this morning with Gordon Brown, he actually described social media as a shouting match without an umpire, and said that he has been personally attacked by Elon Musk in the last couple of weeks and didn't know whether to wear that as a badge of honor. So is Meta any better? That rhymes. Zuckerberg recently announced that Facebook would be removing independent fact checkers and moving to X's model of community notes. This is where the accuracy of content is decided by individual users. It's feared that these changes, which came into force only a week before Trump took office, will lead to more misinformation and probably more hateful content or responses to content, particularly regarding LGBTQ+ rights and immigration. At the moment, these changes are only in the US and not in the EU, UK, but of course, that's likely to change, and those changes are probably coming pretty soon. The company also disbanded their diversity, equity, and inclusion team and amended their hateful policy conduct. And apparently it's now fine to call people who identify as LGBTQ+ as mentally ill. And if all that wasn't bad enough, Meta has also restricted the effectiveness of paid ads for charities that are working on health, social, or political issues. Then lastly, TikTok was banned in the US, although that didn't last too long. It resumed after about 24 hours. And of course, President Trump was credited for its return. And the cynics amongst us could argue that that was maybe a ploy to gain favor with Gen Z. All of this just serves to remind us that we do not own these platforms. We are merely tenants. So we need to really start having serious conversations within our organizations about whether these platforms go against our values and what we stand for. Is it time to vote with our feet and leave, or is there an argument to be made for staying? So many charities and organizations in the third sector have made the decision to leave X. One of the biggest UK charities, Mind, the mental health charity, left last week and issued quite a bold statement about leaving. So HELS, LGBTU Scotland, made the decision to leave Twitter before it became X. And what led you to that decision?
Yeah, so for context, LGBT Youth Scotland left in May 2023, so it was after Elon Musk had taken over, but before it had rebranded. And I think there are lots of different reasons that happened. I think specifically when you're working with the demographics that we work with, we exist to support LGBT plus young people, and being in a space which is not going to be safe for them is not something that we want to encourage. We don't want people trying to find support and information coming to look for us on social media and instead finding all sorts of other things. And I think that safety issue was a very big part of that. It was our most successful platform by follower count, but by engagement rates, it wasn't the huge loss that perhaps it could have looked like if you were only looking at your followers. And I think there was an overwhelming sense from people within our communities who were still on the platform that they were looking for alternatives as well. And a bit of a solidarity between us as an organisation supporting them and as the people that we exist to work with. And that'll be different for other organisations and the people that they work with, but among queer young people, it felt like the most sensible, the safest, the most supportive thing to do would be to leave at that point when we felt it wasn't a place we wanted to be directing them to.
Mm-hmm. And did you receive any backlash at the time for leaving, or were people generally supportive of that?
Within the groups that we work with from young people, there was no backlash from that. It, made us more mindful of the other ways that we communicate with stakeholders who were still using X. So obviously, if you're looking at sort of policy spheres and like professional organisations, other third sector groups who we've got amazing partnerships with who were still on that platform, it just meant being a bit mindful and a bit proactive in engaging with them and saying these are our reasons, and they're not a reflection on anyone else's choices, but they're the reasons that we have taken this decision for us. It got picked up by media as a sort of news story that a charity had come off a social media platform, because I think at that time it wasn't so common.
No.
But I wouldn't say it was backlash. I think there was overwhelmingly a lot of support for the decision to do that.
And when you did leave, did you make a big statement about it, or did you just sort of pin a tweet and say, we're off, find us here?
So there's a statement that's up on our website, and using our website meant that we were able to control that narrative, put up the statement with the length that we wanted, with the terminology that we wanted, to reach the audiences we wanted, so we could send that through emails via links, we could link to that through our other social media. We didn't pin a tweet because we completely deleted the profile, so there's no remnants of it, because leaving that sitting dormant with our old content on it still felt like we don't want young people to stumble across this, find out-of-date information, find information that's maybe a year old and see that there's no action since then and think that perhaps as an organisation we're dormant. So we completely deleted the whole thing and then re-registered so that we kept the username so that nobody could take our username and impersonate us. So if you are coming off of there, I would recommend doing the same.
Great, thank you. Ben, so your organisation has 3 accounts on X, and they're all still active.
Yes.
Are you considering leaving the platform? Is this something that you are having an internal discussion about, or have you decided that your audience is still there and that you'll remain on X?
We certainly would be among the, looks like 50% from the poll who are considering leaving. So just in case anyone's wondering, the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland, the 3 accounts to which you refer as Edinburgh Zoo, Highland Wildlife Park, and then the overall charity itself. There are many ways I feel quite conflicted as an organisation. Personally, I don't like these. I've never been on Twitter, I wouldn't be on X. From an organisational perspective, there is as I say, I feel somewhat conflicted, because on the one hand, engagement levels are quite high. There's a recent study published which shows for young people in particular, the online areas, including X, including TikTok, are often their first really valuable engagement with nature. For previous generations, of course, it would actually be outside in nature, but for younger generations, it is literally on screen. That's their first connection with nature. So that's incredibly important for us. But there's definitely practical times when quite clearly what's happening is completely misaligned with our values. So, for example, we'll routinely find instances where, for example, some of you might remember last year we lost our red panda due to fireworks at Edinburgh Zoo. All sorts of horrible comments coming to there was an overwhelming groundswell of support for the zoo, but what the team had to put up with was completely unacceptable in terms of the tone and the nature of a lot of the comments. It really came to fore in 2023 because every year Edinburgh Zoo, as an organisation, a charity committed to inclusion, diversity, accessibility, we go to the Pride March every year in Edinburgh and also up in the Highlands as well. 2022, that elicited very little response when we posted that on Facebook. Bizarrely, the same in 2024, because in 2023 it just erupted, absolutely erupted in terms of the actual barrage of hate, because it seemed to be picked up by one or two accounts out there with a very, very large and very, very, with a following with very, very vehement views. And that really brought home the extent to which the platform can be at conflict with our values. Now, in terms of where we are at the moment, are we considering leaving? We certainly are, but what we're very keen to do is not do a top-down decision from a management perspective. So at the moment, our communications team, which looks after our social media accounts, they're the ones conducting the review, and they're the ones who are going to feed back to us to then to come up with a recommendation as to what we should or shouldn't do. I'll admit I was a little bit disappointed because off the back of what had happened with Pride in 2023, I did say, we can leave if you wish. Mm-hmm. Absolutely we can. And I was hoping they were going to say Twitter's really, really poor engagement. The response was, we've spent an enormous amount of time engaging and curating these audiences. And it's by and large very, very positive. And we don't want to leave behind those who are solidly on our side. And we want to be that voice of nature for them. So therefore the conflict's there, but it's absolutely under review.
Yeah. And as a trustee of Charity Comms, we have been having this discussion as well. So for those of you who maybe don't know, Charity Comms is a professional membership body for people working in the charity sector who work in comms, as the name says. And normally that would be, totally operational decision to leave a platform if there's poor engagement, because it's a question of what do we put our time and resource into. But as a sort of sector body, leaving X would have been a very big statement in the sector, and we felt that that was more a governance issue. So it's very interesting how you've taken that top-level approach. And, if you have the engagement on there, then that is a wider conversation than simply just leaving. So Rebs, as a Charity Comms consultant, I'm sure you're having this conversation with lots of your clients. What have you been advising them?
The first thing that charities really need to do, and what I'm saying to my clients, is consider your reason for actually being there in the first place. So, for example, many charities will be on X to reach external stakeholders and to engage with external stakeholders. So if that's why you're on X, the most important thing to do is to check that those people, for example, MSPs, policymakers, are still actually actively using the platform. That would be kind of the number one thing to do. And the second thing really is, with any social media channel, you really want to make sure that that channel is meeting your aims and objectives overall as an organisation. If it's no longer doing that for whatever reason, then you shouldn't be on that platform, basically. The second thing I'm advising people to do is to look at who's actually engaging with the content through your analytics. So, your engagement, your reach, your engagement rate, your follower numbers as well. So I was working with a client quite recently who had said that they felt that X, when we started the audit, they said that they felt that X was probably their most successful channel. And because it had the highest number of followers. But when we actually started looking into things like engagement rate and things like who their followers actually are, a lot of them were bots, spam accounts, gambling accounts, porn accounts. So many porn accounts on X right now, it's crazy. And just kind of like trolls as well. So actually, you've got to look at, even if your follower number is still fairly high, who are those people? Like, are they real people? Are they actually engaging with your content? Obviously, as we've already kind of touched upon quite heavily, I think there's the ethical question of, do you want your charity to be associated with, frankly, quite a right-wing platform? The toxic culture has always been bad since Musk took over, but it's going to get worse now that Trump is actually in power. So yeah, I think you've really got to consider that very carefully as well, depending on the type of organisation you are. You might not want to expose your followers to that, like LGBT Youth Scotland have made that decision quite rightly. And I think as well, another thing to consider is actually your exit strategy. Yeah. So if you are thinking of leaving, how are you actually going to do that? And I think Health's suggestion, or the way that they've done it, with kind of completely leaving the platform but then claiming the account back, is a really, really good one, because it means no one can impersonate you at all. Another way that you could do it is kind of more the quiet quit approach, where you keep the platform, you don't actually, you don't actually leave the platform, but you have quite a strong statement that says why you're leaving, a bit like what Mind have done, or had done at the time. I don't know if they've actually deleted the account yet or not. but you have that statement pinned to the top of your profile and you tell people where else they can go and find you. You make it very clear that it's a dormant account and that you won't be responding to, questions or comments on that platform. People can find you at X, Y, and Z. Part of that is so that no one can claim the account. Part of it also is, you never know what will happen with X. It's probably the only time in my life that I would say that I can be a little bit conservative. But when it comes to communication strategies, I think sometimes there is something to be said about being that little bit conservative. Quit the platform by all means, but don't necessarily think carefully before you just kind of delete it. But I understand why organisations absolutely do that as well. So it really depends on the type of organisation you are and that will kind of determine what approach you take, right?
Yes. So if you are thinking about leaving a platform or even joining one, Charity Comms actually has a free resource on their website, which is a platform checklist. So if you go into their website, you can download it for free, and it takes you through all the types of questions you should be asking about whether to join a platform, stay on a platform, leave a platform. So you might find that quite helpful if you are having discussions internally. So we all know that it's not just X that is raising ethical questions. It's now also all of Meta's products. And by that, we mean Facebook, Instagram, Threads, WhatsApp. But obviously, these are huge historical platforms where no doubt you probably have a really strong community, because Facebook is likely to have been the first social media platform that you would have started for your charity. And Facebook, of course, has and continues to raise quite a lot of money for charities through the donate button, Facebook challenges, etc.
We've had conversations internally about the ethics of being on these platforms and the particular challenge of effectively being a monopoly for the platforms that we are on. There are obviously other platforms, but aside from LinkedIn, all of our social presence is Meta. And the fact that that is where young people are still, and it's how we build a lot of the conversations that we have with young people. There's so much engagement there. We run quarterly stats on all of our social media that look at all of those metrics, and they're just so strong that coming off of there would be perhaps ethically right in the sense of a response to what the platforms are doing, but I don't know about the ethics of shutting down such an important space for the people that we exist to engage with. Mm-hmm. And that's really complicated for us. And I think there is sometimes that thing of, as individuals, we want to be able to make a stand and say, this is gross, we're leaving. But as an organisation, that is not in any way viable at the moment. And for the communities that we exist for, there are still so many people still using those platforms. There's a lot of people using those platforms to criticise what is going on them. Mm-hmm. And coming off of them, I think, would be really damaging for our ability to reach new audiences, really damaging for our ability to continue engaging with the people that we currently work with. And as I said at the start, when one organisation owns so many different things, it's a much bigger question than just having one place where you decide this isn't right for me. And it might be that on a case-by-case basis, I know that our Facebook numbers aren't what they used to be. I think Facebook has sort of kept a demographic who love it and have used it for a long time, and maybe they aren't as reflected in the people that we work with, which is sort of 13 to 25. And it might be that that's where there is space for us to step away. I think Instagram at the moment, there isn't, and so the ethics of that is all under the same umbrella, but it's a lot more complicated than that, is where we are with that conversation.
Yeah. I think with Facebook, that whole sense of community is so important, and it is the one platform where you can have private groups. No other platform at the moment offers that. So, having a safe space for people to chat in a group, that you moderate who is in that group, is really powerful and just doesn't exist anywhere else. And sure, we could probably build a forum or something like that, but getting people to remember to go there when they're probably already on Facebook is really difficult. Working in social media when you're the person managing the account can be really difficult when you are suddenly trolled and you're in a crisis comm situation. And even if you're not, lots of us work for causes that are very emotional, very hard hitting, and sometimes we can see things we don't necessarily want to see that are really upsetting. So I just want to talk about well-being. So, we need to protect our own well-being and those of our team. So Ben, when the Pride tweet happened, obviously that must have taken a toll on your team's mental health and well-being. So what did you do during that crisis to sort of help them out?
Okay, well, first of all, I have to applaud our communications team for their response, because I thought it was incredible. We also have an approach which is no different to our parks. If someone comes to Edinburgh Zoo or Highland Wildlife Park and acts in a hateful manner, etc., they will leave. They'll be made to leave. And I see absolutely no difference between the offline and online world in that sense. What I found really interesting in terms of the approach our communications team took to the vitriol they had to put up with following the Pride March in 2023 was when it became apparent just how things were exploding online. Myself and other senior managers in the organisation, we were very quick to say, you can block and delete. That's in the social media guidelines which we've established. The response from the team was, we don't want to. We'd rather call them out. We'd rather people see what they're saying online so we can then respond to it. We're very passionate that nature's for everyone. We're very passionate that everyone sees that that's our stance, that nature's for everyone. So our response was a bit, okay, you've got to look after yourself here, but if you're prepared to spend the rest of today, the rest of tomorrow, calling it out for what it is, then more power to you. The most important thing was the practical side of things in terms of having time away from the screen, having rest. We've got a communication team of 4, which allows us the time to say, well, maybe one person's going to do a couple of hours of responses, move on. Incredibly difficult if you're a far smaller charity and you've got one person, that's what you're dealing with 100% of the time. So in that sense, we are in that lucky position to be able to spell members of staff if they're going through something difficult. But I think it's really important from a wellness and well-being point of view that it's not just about the communications team, that's across the whole organisation. At RSS, we do awards every year. There's a Team of the Year award and there's a Member of Staff of the Year award. And the person who was kind of at the forefront of our responses, I was so pleased when they were nominated and selected for Member of Staff of the Year. And just as overjoyed when the communications team were selected for Team of the Year, which I thought was a wonderful way, not coming from management, a wonderful way coming from votes from across our entire staff base to say, we really value what you did and the way you stood up for our values. And I think that really came through. It's made a difference to the culture of the organisation.
Great. I've just remembered something that I'm going to mention now because I know I'll forget it otherwise. If you work in social media for a charity, there is a private Facebook group called Charity Solidarity. Please join it. It was actually set up by Becky Steeden when she was at the RNLI as a place to go when these sorts of crisis situations happened and you just really wanted to get some support from your peers who obviously work in social media and get it. But that's obviously not just what it's there for. It's a really good group. It's not hugely active, but it's a great place to be part of a really good community. So definitely join it if it would be helpful. Which brings me on to small charities. What would be your top tip, I guess, for a small charity? What could they do if this, not necessarily a crisis, but, if they are getting quite a few comments that are, hurtful, abusive, or traumatic, what would be your tip for them? What could they do for their well-being?
For their well-being, I think that, the most important thing for people's well-being really is to make sure that they're getting time away. Well, there's 2 sides to it. Half of it is to do with management and making sure that there's proper training in place for those people, that people feel confident in being able to use those platforms, that you're using a third-party platform if you have the resources and the funding to do so. But also, you know, making sure that individual members of the team are taking a bit of responsibility for their own well-being as well. You know, for me, things like making sure I'm getting out for a walk every lunchtime, you know, making sure I'm getting away from the screen, you know, going to the gym in the evenings, things like that make a really, really big difference. So I think just trying to get small charities to take a bit of ownership of that, especially if you're in a leadership position, and making sure that your team aren't overworking, because there's always, I think in small charities in particular, I've worked with quite a few small charities. I've worked in-house in small charities, or I've been a sole fundraiser and a sole comms person, and you do overwork your hours. Like, it's very, very easy to do. Like, most people in this room will probably know what I'm talking about here. So I think just giving yourself, making sure that you're being quite strict with yourself, not to do that, especially if you're working from home, because it's very easy to overwork from home, I reckon.
Hels?
I'd agree with all of that. The organisation that I was in before my current one was a very small organisation. It was like 8 full-time equivalent staff and one person looking after comms who worked 3 days a week, and being very diligent about making sure that he was taking breaks and making sure that as the person managing that role, I was covering to create that space and to model good behaviour, and like, I will cover it for these number of hours, and we are a small organisation and people will have to recognise that we are only around these number of hours. We've put a message up that says that. If they're doing stuff outside of that, I will be the first one in to deal with it and tidy up the mess, but we cannot be expected to be as online as someone who is not doing this for work but for some sort of personal motivation.
But it's so true as well with like role modelling behaviour. I think if you're in a management position or a leadership role of any description, I think role modelling the behaviour that you want to see in others becomes like extremely important when it comes to like good practices. Like I was always really careful when I was in management roles not to email people outside of working hours. Not because I didn't want to email them, but just because I thought if someone receives this email, they might think that I'm expecting the response from them at like 11 o'clock at night, and that's not okay. That's just the way my brain works, but it's taking responsibility for that and going, actually, I'm going to leave this until working hours. They know that there's no expectation.
Yeah.
So having good hygiene practices.
I think it's RNID who sort of did like a mandatory block your lunch breakout. So I think between like 12 and 2, you're not technically allowed to email anyone or put in meetings, which I thought was really good, because you're right, people work through their lunch break, they don't stop to take that break.
Totally.
Ben, have you got any tips?
I think in terms of role modelling those behaviours, the key word for me comes down to perspective. You know, I find it difficult enough to get a comms team of 4 to switch off and not be responding to even positive comments at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. So for one person, a smaller organisation, back to your question, that must be enormously pressurising for them to feel they need to handle all of that at all times. But even though social media is 24/7, some of the perspective I try and model is around what's the worst that can happen. You know, if the comment is still there for the next 12 hours, it's going to be okay. And if the comment sits there and it's publicly viewable, it says a hell of a lot more about them than it ever will about you professionally, your team, or us as an organisation.
Great, thank you.